Welcome to Binge the Bible Bonus Features, a podcast where we dive into the crazy, unexpected, and interesting details that we didn't have time to talk about on Sunday. When you get into God's Word gets into you. We want to help you get into the Bible, understand the Bible, and apply the Bible, and our hope is that Bonus Features will help you do just that. Well, guys, my name is Caroline. I am joined today by Pastor Jeff, Pastor Jason, and new on the podcast, our very own Aaron Johnson.
And it's so good to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
I am excited to be here.
You should be excited.
You got a bubbly in tow, and you're ready to go.
Bursting with bubbly.
Oh,
look at that.
He has two taglines.
Sponsored by Bubbly.
Yeah. Please
Get on this
us.
podcast, you just start rhyming.
I know, right? Have everybody tag Bubbly in our podcast. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, tag Bubbly, all the things. Well, today we're talking about Joshua.
Yes, we are.
We sure are. So we're going to get started with some major moments from Joshua, some takeaways, all that kind of stuff.
So we're jumping right into
We
that.
are in it. There's no small talk for this one.
There's a preamble to Joshua that I didn't know about. We can talk about that first if you want, or we can just get into it.
Take us there, Jason.
Well, I was going to actually
Maybe we need a preamble. I don't know.
kind of threw me off guard with like getting
start
things
with a
out of
little
order.
humor?
Like
A humor. Do you have a joke?
Yeah.
Okay, this is our joke segment. Go ahead.
You know that Joshua didn't have any parents? Tells us right there, Joshua 1:1, that he was the son of none.
All right. And concluding his trip on the
It's been
Bible
awesome
Binge
having
podcast.
AJ with us on the podcast.
This is what I'm here for.
Yeah.
That is good. That's gold.
well, I'll be even more ready to step in
Well,
and
let's
continue the
start with
discussion
this.
now.
As Jason's figuring out some major moments to take us through, let's start with this. So Joshua, we turn the corner from books of the law, okay, so God's law, and we're beginning the first of 12 historical books. So yay us, we finished up the Pentateuch. That was exciting, and now we're beginning what would be the first of 12 historical books. So that's exciting.
Yep.
We're making progress, guys.
Man, I feel like we're binging pretty effectively here.
I mean, for those keeping up with the Lifepoint Bibles, we're on page 181.
Ooh.
We are cooking with gas.
Out
Yes,
of a
we
possible.
A lot. There's a lot of pages.
Hey, listen, no. We only
Come on.
focus on
We're making
good
a little
things.
bit of headway.
Yeah.
It's all good.
All right,
No,
so
but-
where does Joshua get started?
Well, so one thing, Pastor, I was going to actually kind of bring that up. I love that you kind of segued into this is like where we get into the books of history, and it's awesome how and why we read these as books of history, because actually just some of the questions that I've gotten over the last week, some of the people know we were kind of reading ahead and studying ahead. One of the questions was like, well, how do we know, how do we trust that all these things happen? Because there's some pretty amazing things that happen in Joshua, like crazy stories. Some are like you can kind of explain it from our perspective, or maybe even like a scientific offering. Some, there's no way to explain it other than we serve an amazing supernatural God. And all the archaeological finds that have happened in the counting 21st century, 20th century, really do start to add to the validity and the claims of the historical value of Old Testament books. And so instead of taking away credit and not taking away value, they're actually letting us know that the people that lived in this day and age had a mind and a tactile way of calculating history, recording history, and that it wasn't these flippant little stories or just narratives. They were actually history. So I love that we have that. But one of the things that I love about Joshua is even from the day of Jesus, when he references the Tanakh, which is the Jews' version of the Bible at the time, the Old Testament Bible, he references the prophets, which is the second part of the Tanakh. You've got like the book of the law, you've got the prophets, and then you've got the writings, which would have included Psalms, Song of Solomon, stuff like that. But when he references that he fulfills all of these, you notice that he says to prophets, the first book in their book of prophets would have been Joshua. They didn't reference it as a historical book. It was referenced from a prophetic standpoint. And I love that we can read this book, with all the cool stories in it, with all the history that it chronicles. It's still a prophetic book that kind of foreshadows and foretells what's actually going to happen.
Well, I think it's cool that you say that, because I think for some of our binges out there, when they hear this is our fans are called binges.
Binges.
I'm still pushing for the Avengers, but that
The Avengers?
yeah.
I don't know why we
Unite
need
or
to
Avengers
nail this
Assemble.
down.
We do.
What I was saying though was that when people hear historical book, okay, some of them were like, oh, I never really excelled at history. I also didn't exactly excel at academics either, so maybe history wasn't the problem. But I love that you said that while we'll call this a historical book, we have to remember the audience that is being written to, they're being told that basically their story. And I think what's interesting now when we look culturally in our day, there's so much interest in our lineage, like the 23andMe and Ancestry.com. People want to know the story.
I thought you were going Hamilton, like when you were saying interest in where we came from. I was like, yeah, Hamilton, and you're not going that direction.
Definitely not.
Caroline
Sorry,
just hears
Caroline.
everything through the lens of Hamilton.
Yes.
So
I sure do.
What I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted was that we really want to know our backstory. And as we've been saying, like this is their history, God's history, and his story is our history. So don't just look at this as something that happened a long time ago. This is God's redeeming work through his people, but there are principles and lessons that apply to us today that we're able to even talk about with the message on Joshua. But it's exciting when you start looking at it, and then you bring in some of the archaeological evidence, and I'm sure we'll get to discuss some of that. But what I found when I was first working on it, because Joshua is an exciting book. There's so many things. It really breaks into two sections. You have the first section is all about the conquest of Canaan, and the second is the settlement in Canaan. I would say the first half is very exciting. The second half, not so much, which is why in my message I spent so much time on the first half and less on the second. But I will say this, I shared a resource with everybody just a couple of weeks back that has been really helpful for me in my studies, and I just want to show you another one for the folks that want to go a little deeper. This is called Talk Through the Bible, Bruce Wilkinson and Kenneth Boa. My father-in-law, who pastored for a while, actually sent me this the other day. I'm pretty sure I had this back in college, but I didn't. I was like, I don't think I gave it any mind. But it's awesome at helping you succinctly recap books of the Bible. Does a great job, but I love the fact that Joshua, okay, so the first half, conquest of Canaan, we'll get into some of that as we talk through major moments. Second half, not as exciting, unless you were one of those people and you're literally being divvied up your parcel of land.
yeah.
So not exciting for us, very exciting for them. Yeah. So take us, let's get into it.
Well, so when we first walk in, one of the biggest aspects of Joshua is really his character and what kind of leader he is, and the fact that he's taking up for the guy that there would never be another one of. There would never be a prophet greater than Moses.
Yep.
But we see Joshua being commissioned to lead the people of Israel. So we jump into that. I mean, even from chapter 1 is a pretty major moment. And Pastor, I don't know if you want to talk us through that, but it's just the fact that Joshua never shows signs of not wanting the role. Not like Moses. Moses was like, don't let me do this. I don't want to do this. You know, I'll do it, but I need help. We don't really see any of those signs from Joshua that I can see or that I've heard, but we do find that God consistently reminds him to be strong, to be courageous. I'll be with you like I was with Moses. I'm not going to let you drop the ball. You are the person that will do this, that will lead these people. And I love how he leans into his character, even coming from Moses. And AJ, I don't know if it was us that was talking the other day. In my mind, and this isn't like from a scholarly thing, in my mind, I almost saw him as kind of like an Elisha to Moses. Like, you know, how Elisha followed Elijah around wanting to get the mantle and the anointing that Elijah had. Josh never really asked for any of that, but you kind of see that same dedication through the life of Moses.
Josh,
We're calling him Josh.
Yeah. Oh, can I not do that? So I've got kids.
Our pal Josh.
And we watch Josh and the Big Brick Wall, Veggie Tales.
I don't.
Well, so it is interesting because, you know, we're told, there's none greater than Moses. Moses obviously had plenty of leadership failures. I mean, even his own disobedience, instead of speaking to the rock, he struck the rock, and so he can't lead the people into the promised land. Joshua, though, what's interesting is that Joshua, like, he's one of the few leaders that does not record a massive leadership failure. There is one instance that we will get to where he probably could have, he did not listen for the voice of God, but there's no major blemish on him, which is, I mean, kudos.
Strong, upright.
Kudos. One of my favorite things just in Joshua chapter 1 is this, and I did reference it in the message, but I just want to say it again. I love how matter-of-fact the Bible is. Like, it starts off with Joshua 1:1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then.
Full stop.
Like, just now then.
End of an era.
Like, is that all that you have to say about that? God's like, yeah, he died. I buried him. Now then.
Anywho.
Next man up. And if you're Joshua, you're like, are you kidding? Like, can we sit, I feel like we should say a little more than that. But I love that he's like, now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River. I love that God's like, hey, listen, we're moving on. And there's no dwelling in the past. There's no parking out in the past. We're as great as Moses is, we don't worship the leader. We have a mission. And I remember we did a series. One of the challenges that AJ and I had discussed, even as I was working on this message, was that we did a 12-part series. So if anybody wants to go...
Longest series we've ever done in the history of Lifepoint.
If this podcast doesn't give you enough information, we'll drop it in the show notes. It's a link to a series called Make Ready. And we did 12 parts on Joshua. And one of the things that stood out to me when I did that was that you'll never experience a now then if you don't let go of back when. And I love that God was just like, Moses is dead. Now then... And you're not going to move forward as long as you keep rehashing, reliving, hanging on to the past. And I love how God is making a clean break. We got places to go, things to do. Like Moses was awesome, but he's gone now. Let's get going. And I just think of how often we get caught up in the good old days and back when and that person. And God's like, look, you going to live there or are you going to step in? You can live in the past or the promise. What do you want? And so... As a matter of fact, as God was, I just love that it's just like, now then, let's get going.
Yep.
Let's get down to business, is what he's saying.
You're going in, you're charging in. This is great. No. But even with the last verse that, verse 9 says, do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And that leads right into their charge. And then really into probably the next major moment, which... One of the reasons it's such a major moment for the book of Joshua is because we see such an obscure person like Rahab. All of a sudden, she becomes, a person of renown. We see like her story, and I'm trying not to say too much because Pastor, I'm not sure what you want to share.
Yeah.
I can see.
Well,
but
obviously
there's a lot of foreshadowing from her story.
Obviously, with my message, I spent a lot of time on the first half of Joshua. So walking through the story of Rahab. What I find so interesting about Rahab is that she's mentioned 8 times in Scripture, and 6 of them she's called Rahab the harlot. And I just think about how people are given titles, and unfortunately, we let that title define them, but that title doesn't define them. Doubting Thomas, for instance, like he had tons of faith. He became faith-filled Thomas, but we remember him for being Doubting Thomas. Rahab the harlot, if you jump New Testament, you'll find James talks about her righteousness. So I like to think of her as Rahab the righteous, that, because I think a lot of times we're like, my past, I messed up too much. And Rahab's a great reminder that if you have a tainted past, you just might be a part of an incredible story, because that's what we find in her life. In Matthew, when you read the lineage, there she is in the lineage of the Messiah. Hello.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a redemption.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. Rahab.
Yeah. And typically women wouldn't even be mentioned in the lineage of so.
Well, and one of 2 women
glass ceilings all over the place.
It's crazy. One of 2 women mentioned in Hebrews 11. She's got a great story. But even so, even seeing what she's known for, and even the fact that she was known as a prostitute, something that I've kind of found in some of my reading was that it wasn't so much of a job; it was more of a reputation that she had earned. Because she was like basically in charge of what would have been considered kind of like an inn, like a seedy, shady little place. Yeah. Kind of something like that, I'm guessing. And so it was more of a reputation than a job, but that was kind of what she was known for. But it's crazy, and I know that was I think that was one of the questions we got for the Inquiring Minds.
Yeah.
So everybody wants to know about Rahab.
To jump ahead,
I just picture so the thing that I think is comical. So they send out spies. Okay, so this is not the first time they sent spies into the land.
Yeah,
didn't go well last time. They sent 12. 10 came back with a negative report. 2 were positive. So I'm sure Josh was like, "Look, I'm only going to send 2 this time." Okay, so they go out. Obviously, they wind up at Rahab's place. I just imagine when they came back and were telling Joshua, like, it was crazy. We almost didn't make it, so we were hiding out at Rahab the prostitute's house. And he's like, what? Excuse me? What?
It's the most convenient place.
Yeah,
to
don't worry about that. That's not important.
Yeah.
You had one job.
Yeah, it's not what it sounds like. We were hiding on the roof. And Just has to be kind of a crazy moment.
On the roof?
Yes.
Sure about that?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. No.
Well, the amount of information that we find from Rahab, I mean, even throws back to what we discussed through Numbers and Deuteronomy. That I mean, Jericho was a massive fortified city. Like, and just kind of reading through, like, I mean, it would have appeared because of it was built on a mound and all this stuff. It would have appeared in the distance to have been roughly like 10 stories high. And so for that city to find out that they were actually afraid. You know, they weren't, I mean, they probably had some trust in their walls. And if we know anything like politicians of today, they probably put a lot of trust in their walls, but the people of the city were afraid. And so it was cool to get that kind of information from Rahab and to find out what they really thought. Also, the fact that she believed that they were from God and she wanted to be in line from them was a big deal. It was a big turn in the story. Yeah. And ultimately leading to her salvation and foreshadowing of our ultimate salvation, which is pretty cool. But Pastor, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to dig into there that you couldn't get into in the message.
No, I spent a pretty good bit just talking through that story. It's a good one.
Well, it is a good one. And then just the imagery of the scarlet thread. But moving on into like the Israelites getting ready to cross the Jordan, we just see like big deal after big deal. And Pastor you already mentioned, but moving into chapter 3, we see them getting ready to cross the Jordan. And just kind of a throwback to you know, this could be like that generation's Red Sea. You know, isn't it awesome how we have like these earmarks in our own history where like, you know, we had like I think back to some of my relatives that were in Korea, and they had their Korea, and then my parents had their Vietnam, and you know all this. You know, you look back to these big deals in your life, and all of a sudden they're remembering the talk about the Red Sea, and now they're standing at the Jordan getting ready to cross in. And so we just kind of pick up from there.
Yeah, this is the second time that we see God doing something similar in Joshua's era that he did in Moses' area. So it's weird that it's like, now then, and we're moving on from Moses, but I'm going to show you some tricks that I also performed during Moses' time. So it's kind of like Moses was a foreshadowing of Joshua, even though clearly he overshadows Joshua. He's the bigger deal. But
well, and and so in even this moment, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is just off the cuff here, but so when the first generation passed through the Red Sea, the second generation is passing through the Jordan. Is it? You guys may know this off your head. I don't know if it's Hebrews or what, but it talks about it's almost like a type of baptism for them. Like God took them through the sea, through the river, and so we think about, you know, we celebrate baptisms around our campus, and so just recently we had baptisms, and we'll do a big baptism at the beach. But it's neat that it's a statement to the world that, you know, I belong to Christ, my identity is in Him, and I feel like God is giving them this baptism moment through the waters. These are His people.
yeah,
This is a God that is making a covenant with His people. And so it's just kind of neat. If anybody's like, I don't know if I should get baptized, or I'm like, what are you waiting on? Like, these guys got baptized as they left Egypt through the Red Sea. The next generation is literally getting, you know, baptized as they make their way through the Jordan. Thousands of years, and you could be like, well, I just don't know. Come on. What an amazing lineage to be a part of.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Well, and I even had a note just as a reminder that this was part of the theme of Joshua. Like, God is with you just as I walked with Moses. I will be there for you. And this is the story where we really start seeing Joshua, a.k.a. Josh.
Joshy Josh.
the main man Josh.
You know, my boy Josh. Like, this is where we really
He's
see
like up
him.
there in heaven, like, put some respect on my name.
Ooh,
I got my
Joshua.
own book. Okay, whole book in there after me.
Oh, but this is where we see him really take hold of his leadership, and people, the nation of Israel, really start to trust him as that leader. And we look through, we see the Lord told Joshua, today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you just as I was with Moses. Give this command to the priest. And we go on and we see that they stand at the water's edge, water backs up, they walk across on dry ground, and it doesn't go, everybody in the nation of Israel walks through on dry ground. And it's just a crazy story how that happens. The Ark of the Covenant leads the way, stays there until it gets ready to go. And then, Pastor, I love the visual of that being like a baptism before they step into the promise.
Well, and let me correct myself, because it was 1 Corinthians 10. I was way off. Way off. But it's in there, okay? And that's
Samsonite.
Yeah,
Was
simmies,
way off.
swimmies, I don't know, check the luggage.
Is this
Anyone?
Dumb and Dumber.
Yes. Thank you.
I
Greatest
hate
movies
myself
of
for
all
knowing
time.
that.
Thank you. Yes, our cultural resident expert. Well done.
I'm ashamed at
Humbled.
Dumb and Dumber that I know that.
Are you keeping a list as we do the podcast though? Like all the movies that you haven't seen yet that you're going to go back
No,
and
I
watch?
have seen that one.
Oh, you have?
I just regret it.
Yeah, we just need to watch it again. Yeah, you need to watch the other again.
Yeah. It's not great.
But it's
So-
funny. Sorry.
Going back to the Jordan, it's a good thing that God parted that water because you and I have been there.
We have been there. You talk about
I don't know if it's similar to,
underwhelming. There.
but that's some dirty water.
Yes.
So-
So, well, it's dirty for one, but there were parts where I was like, a good run and jump, I think I could clear it. I think I could cross it. So when you read this, you're like, but it's important to note that the Jordan was at flood stage. And maybe we can find a link for this. When I did the Make Ready series, I had a video of the Jordan River at flood stage.
Yeah.
That crossing that is impressive. So God's stopping that. But
Rushing water, yeah.
What I saw, it was like, I could definitely make it across that. I'll find that video. We'll drop it in, and you can watch and see what the Jordan looks like at flood stage. But yeah, it is disgusting water.
It looks like something you might lose a limb should it get dipped in the water. So,
That might be pollution and civilization from the
Were
last
you,
couple
AJ? Were you
years.
with me on the Jordan trip when I saw people were getting baptized at the Jordan and I saw inappropriate things?
yeah. No,
Were you on that trip?
I wasn't on that one.
I've had a couple trips to Israel, so I'll just tell you the guys, I will not show you the picture. I took one. I shouldn't have, but I did. And so you get baptized, but you have to buy a white
Robe.
robe
No.
to get baptized in the Jordan. Yep. And these are people from all over the world. Okay, bathing suits are different parts of the world. And I see this man go out there by himself. He's going to baptize himself. And he's dipping himself under and coming up out, dipping himself under and coming up. And then he walks out a little bit. And this thing it's the backside completely see-through. I had to take a picture. I feel like this was like life-changing moment for
First
him.
thought that popped into your head.
Well, I was like, this guy's going public for sure, way more than he wanted to. And then we left before we saw anything else. But
Yeah, I'm not gonna
that
lie,
was my
that's not where I
Jordan
thought
River
that was
experience.
going.
He was naked and unashamed.
Or was he naked and afraid?
Yeah.
That's also a thing.
No, he was naked. Pastor Jeff was afraid.
Yeah.
So if
Maybe
you
that's what
go
it
to
means.
Israel to get baptized in the Jordan,
Wear undies.
Yes, please.
Yeah. They should sell undies
Wow.
too.
Good.
Anyway. All
White
right.
swimwear, always a hit.
Yeah, I worked at a surf shop for a long time, and that was one of the things we knew not to keep in stock for guys. No white swimwear.
I don't think anybody needs white swimwear.
They don't.
So, speaking of, lifting up memorials to the Lord,
What a segue.
What a sight to behold.
Well done, reining us in. Well done.
great. One of my favorite, and I just for some of the other little Bible geeks out there, this is just something that I love to reference, and why I think this is such a cool part of the
Shout out to
transition of the
Alethea
story.
when you say Bible geeks too. I learned she nerds out on this.
Oh,
so
she does.
yes.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, AK, let's
Well,
go.
So I just heard another interesting fact from Alethea.
Okay.
Caroline, I think you got a firsthand account. Why don't you
I did.
tell the Bingies what's going on.
Bingies, I feel like there's a certain level of arrival that, like, a podcast, a show, a movie gets. It's whenever someone has taken, and this is, of course, not Alethea. This is just someone that she knows. We're not going to call any names out. But she has heard of someone who's turned our podcast into their very own drinking game.
Yes.
What do you mean drinking game?
So they take a sip of
Like
orange
communion.
juice. Yeah,
like-
communion.
How to make this podcast even better? People are drinking while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
So there's a few things that
a few things.
And
I
I
did
kind of want to know what they are so that I can do them more and more.
apparently one of them is me making faces, and I'm like, unfortunately, that's just
It is
what
your
I
face,
I
yeah.
do.
We
we know
probably
that.
should post some of the steals on our social medias of the faces
every
that you
still
make.
they post of any podcast frame so far is just not.
I
flattering.
submit, I would like to request, I think Binge the Bible bingo. So every time we do something, it's like you fill that.
bingo card.
Yeah, and we'll give out, I don't know, we got a little Starbucks card for for whoever feels it. So
In
somebody
case
make
the
that for
content
us.
is not engaging enough. You can also play a game
Hey, I love everything I
and
hear.
play games.
simultaneously.
Just want to go on record. I'm not endorsing the alcohol.
No.
Just this. We have a yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not endorsing it. We're
not
just,
endorsing it.
You know, we've
That's
arrived.
funny that
Just
somebody would say
reporting.
that.
Not endorsing, just
That's
reporting.
a thing apparently. So
Yeah.
now you know.
Oh, well. So chapter 4,
Yes.
Joshua and the big brick wall.
Yeshua.
So we see them. They've come out of the Jordan. They're carrying out, and the Lord says, "Now choose 12 men from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out and pile them up on a place that you will camp tonight." And I love this aspect because what we see right now is they're unified as a nation. You know, the 12 tribes of Israel, they're unified. You know, they're getting ready to go in and claim the promised land. What I love seeing this is a picture of in Elijah's day when he was challenging the prophets of Baal. And before he started his presentation of calling fire down from heaven, he stacked 12 stones. And at the time, the nations of Israel were not united. And we'd seen like tons of evil being done in the land. They didn't have any. They had an evil king. Elijah was there to help restore a lot of the promise and bring God's people back into alignment. But what we see him stacking those 12 stones, all of the nation of Israel standing there would have known what that represented, which was unity in who they were. They were God's people. And I love that it was a hearken back to the day before they claimed the promised land.
A hearken.
A hearken. Don't you? I'm telling you, man, like the pastor has been saying,
Like
when you
the
get in-
like the herald angels, right?
when you jump in the Bible, when you get in the Bible gets into you.
You got the
My
King James version
original
over there?
language that I learned this in was King James.
Saith thou.
Actually, one of the coolest things in the world is when you go to like some of the smaller churches in the I guess like the more rural areas that I'm
The
from.
country is what you're looking for.
Well, I don't want to be offensive, but yes, out
that
in the
offensive?
country where
You live in the country.
I did. I lived in the
Your
country, and I
people.
love living in the country. I love being from the country. But what's crazy is you walk in there and you're like, you know, everybody talks like Columbus County talk. Like they talk really slow. Like sometimes you're like, what is this language? I don't get these references. And then they start praying in church, and it is like complete, you know, 10th century like England, and it's like perfect King James.
Mixed with some King James.
It's amazing. But anyway, I just love that this is a picture of how and when they were unified as a nation. Like that memorial is what that speaks to.
Yeah.
The unity of a nation, the unity of God's people.
Well, and it's also one way, because we've seen this through Deuteronomy, where God's like, I want you to teach the next generation, teach the next generation, teach the next generation. We see it over and over and over in the way that they're supposed to live their life. And then it says, when your descendants ask, this is verse 21, when your descendants ask, what do these stones mean? It says, you know, tell them Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you'd all crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we'd all crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, so that you might always fear, respect, revere the Lord your God. So he's saying, I want you to teach, you know, every time you pass by, your kids are going to be like, what is that? What are those stones? What is that for? And you're going to always tell them. And then if you keep going, I don't know if you're ready to go into chapter 5 yet, but I'm just going to kind of take a little, we're going to peek into 5 for a second. He's doing this so that everyone knows how powerful the Lord is. Well, as soon as you get to chapter 5, it's like all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and the Canaanite kings, they've heard, and they are, man, they're shaking in their boots. They have melted in fear because of the Israelites, and they know that God is with them. So it's like, this is why we're doing this, and then you literally see it happen right there. Chapter 5.
That's awesome.
West of the Jordan.
Anyway, moving on. So jumping in, and we see in chapter 5 something awesome happens. Israel reestablishes covenant ceremonies. I got a feeling that's going to pop up in our later discussion. So we can save a little of that if you guys want to, because something I really want us to talk about, Pastor, and use this time to kind of dive into this, is the fact that we see Joshua is confronted towards the end of chapter 5. And it says, Joshua asks him, are you friend or you foe? He says, neither one. He replied, I am the commander of the Lord's army. What's your visual on this? Some people believe that this was God. Some people believe it was an angel of God. In my head, I see Archibald. He was the artichoke and Veggie Tales that confronts Josh again
I
in
see
the
Jon
big brick
Snow
wall.
from Game of Thrones. I was like, the Lord Commander. I was like,
Game of what?
oh, I don't know. I just read an article about it one time. Anyway, I don't watch that. What? Moving on. That's what I think of. But yeah, Veggie Tales. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, but it's just a great visual because we see that obviously God is trying to
Depends on what your visual is.
It's not Game of Thrones, if that's what you're wondering.
Yeah,
You said Archibald. I was thinking the basketball player. I was like, what?
I mean, that's pretty awesome too.
So you're in chapter 5.
Chapter
you're
5.
in verse 13. Joshua was near Jericho. He looked up, saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. So that's never a good sign.
Yeah.
You know, you're like I'm about to cross somebody. We're about to throw down. And so Joshua went up to him and asked a very logical question. Are you for us or our enemies? And he responds, neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Joshua's like, oh man, I mean, he hit his face. He's face down, which look at how many times you see Joshua going like face down and, you know, in the presence of the Lord, before the Lord, interceding for people. Moses did the same thing. So he's just like face down.
Ultimate reverence. I love that.
Yes. So he's in reverence, literally says that. And he asks, what message does my Lord have for his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals. For the place where you are standing, which technically you're laying, is holy ground. And he did so. And what I think is interesting, so my quick takeaway is this, is Joshua's like, hey, are you for me or against me? And it's like, neither. It's like, I'm not on your team. You need to be on my team, okay? This is not team Joshua or team Jericho. This is team the Lord. And you need to get on my page. I think how often are we like trying to get God on our page and God's like, look, no, it's my page. You need to get on my page. And I think that's what he's saying to him right here. He's like, I am the commander of the Lord's army. Get on my page.
Yeah. I also love the fact that Joshua didn't like hide. He didn't go get other men. It says that he went up to him and demanded, are you friend or foe? So he didn't, I mean, because you got to think if he is an army, part of the army of the Lord, he was probably decked out in all this gear. And my man Josh didn't hold back. He was like ready to go.
You know what it makes me think of?
Josh.
I know only you will remember this. You remember growing up singing a song, I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army.
This
Yes,
is where you break
sir.
out into song, Caroline. You're not singing.
I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery.
I don't remember the rest of it, but
Yes.
yeah. So I'm
High
with
five.
you. That was
Thank
good.
the Lord.
Thanks, Pastor.
I'm just glad that AJ's here because this is the first time that I'm not the only one with the face of like,
we do need to say though,
What
like
just happened?
this was an area
it happens
that
a lot.
Vacation
Welcome.
Bible School just happened. Summer camp just happened.
Yeah.
this is it's called discipleship, AJ.
You didn't have that on the 8 Mile of Detroit?
So
8 miles.
Yeah, you guys don't know this, but he grew up on the 8 Mile. Literally ran with
The 8 Mile.
that's what we call it. Yeah.
Now AJ brought up a song before because I was thinking, I was like, I don't remember any songs that I learned that came out of the book of Joshua.
Oh, definitely.
And AJ was quick to bring one out.
only because I have heard our fearless leader sing it so many times.
What was that song, by the way, AJ?
Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho.
Hey, Jericho. You got to kind of shoot it up.
Got to get the
Jericho.
swing.
That's all the
Swing,
words I
AJ.
know. That's all the words I know.
I feel like I put a little bit of that swing on it. Like, I
That's
don't
my
think that's
limit.
how we sang it growing up, but and the walls came a tumbling down. Take it away, Caroline. Second verse.
I just lapse into something else
Man.
completely.
Oh, that's good
I'm
stuff.
so thankful that I grew up in a family that, you know, I got exposed to things like this.
I'm thankful that I
It's
did
culture.
not.
All right, so where we see this comes into,
were we?
not to ignore what anybody was saying or doing, but that's where we fall right into the, chapter 6, and this is one of the bigger stories. Pastor, you spend a lot of time in this, the fall of Jericho. So Joshua is relaying the battle plans. I mean,
Which have to be ridiculous.
like, what do you do if you're in his army and you hear him communicating the strategy? Are you whispering to the guy beside you, or are you paying
They're not
attention
really
intently?
battle plans,
Yeah.
Right.
per se.
so
No, I nodded off for a second. Did he say? What did he say?
yeah. Well, when we first meet Joshua, you remember where we meet him? He is commander of the army.
Mm-hmm.
So he is, you know, it's Moses is up on a hill. This was the Moses, Aaron, and Hur moment where Moses is on a hill. As long as his hands are up, the battle is being won, but his hands got heavy and fell. They started losing, so Aaron and Hur hold his hands up. Well, Joshua was down in the battle, so we meet him. He's a military leader. He's a strategist. Matter of fact, the whole reason that they're going after Jericho, so there's three main battles. There's the north, there's the south, Jericho's in the middle. Strategically speaking, take out Jericho, cut off communication, divide and conquer. He's brilliant. So I can't
makes
imagine...
Yeah.
You know, can you imagine the battle plan that our brilliant military leader's going to bring to us? And God basically tells him, you're going to take a walk for 7 days. And you're going to put the priests, and you're going to put some trumpets out front. So, put the worship band up front. And, he's got to bring that back to the people. Like, oh, here it goes. Because in this day, the way you would take a city was you would try to build a siege against the city. You would cut off their water supply so that they run out of water in the city. You'd cut off all of the lanes of transport in and out so they'd get no more food. You're starving them. And so you would then build a wall. You'd like a big ramp so that you could get up in the city. You might try to like battering ram the door. And so they're like, what is it? What's their strategy? And he's like, okay, day one, we're going to walk around the city. It's like, oh, I like it. Getting in their heads, messing with them. Because, their hearts were melting like wax, the people of Jericho. So they're standing, I imagine, looking around the top of the wall, and they're just watching them walking. Like, what are they doing? And then they go home. And then day 2, they come back. Day 3, they came back. Day 4, back. 5, back. 6, back. By that point, they're like, what? They're probably getting a little bit of confidence up there on the walls of Jericho. And then day 7, they just keep going. And they shout. Anyway, just relaying that to the rest of your people had to have just been like, no, for real. What's our strategy?
Yeah. What are we doing?
What's our strategy?
Yeah.
Oh, that's it.
Well,
and then the walls are just going to fall.
And it makes so much sense because this city, they would have had an internal source of water. We find out that they had just had a harvest, so they had plenty of food. So they would have lasted against any standing army. They would have lasted. Like, there's no way they would have starved them out or anything like that. And we do find like the actual size of Jericho is like 9 to 10 acres roughly. So it'd been easy for them to walk around in a day. And it's I don't know. It's just brilliant. It's just brilliant the way God works. But we also see a lot of imagery here too when it comes to, and I think we'll probably get to cover this in some of the questions too. But just a lot of imagery of the first fruits being offered. This was the first city they encountered. It was a battle that basically God did all of the work. Yeah. So this truly was his victory.
Yeah, which is why I took a moment just to talk about when at the beginning of chapter 6, when we're told the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out, no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, this is what I like. See, I've delivered Jericho into your hands. No, you haven't. No, you haven't. I mean, we've all ordered stuff, right? I'm expecting a package at this very moment. I keep checking to see if it's been delivered. It's not been delivered. This has not been delivered. It's out for delivery, but it hasn't happened yet. And God's like, no. In the natural, the city is locked up. But in the supernatural, I've already given it to you. Like, it's done. The battle is done, which is just a reminder that all they had to do was show up. It's just show up. It's obedience. It's faithfulness. That brings a victory. If we will show up, God will show off. Yeah. It's like, can you see? He's like, I don't see it, but no, look again. And so I love that little detail.
Yeah. And it's such a fun story. And Pastor, you cover that all in your message. And then at the end, we see after everything's happened, we see Joshua pronounce a curse, which was to me when I first read this, I was like, that's kind of weird.
Right. And I didn't get to talk about this at all. So
you don't really do that at the end of a battle, but he pronounces a curse. We see that in chapter 6, verse 26. May the curse of the Lord fall on anyone who tries to rebuild the town of Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn, he will lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest son, he will set up its gates.
It's heavy.
And so it is. But it also reminds us, like, the city in its entirety, wholly, is being dedicated to the Lord.
Well, it belongs to the Lord. And when things belong to the Lord and then somebody tries to take them, it seems as if there's always negative consequences.
Yeah, we're going to see how that plays out
later on
for that individual. And so I want to say, because we even have a question about that, like, why in the world that doesn't, the whole city belongs to the Lord. So when somebody takes something that belongs to the Lord, there is, there's a curse, there's a negative consequence, and it happens.
And interesting, we've been to this site as well, present day, and there is nothing built there.
Right.
Nothing exists in that spot. Wow.
I wouldn't even, now they're like, I'm not touching it.
And so from there, we see them going in, feeling good. They encounter city Ai. Pastor, I know you talk about the pronunciation.
Yeah, I one of these days I'll bring my little pronunciation book, but it's I believe it's pronounced I.
Ozzy?
I believe it's Ozzy Osbourne.
I'm singing Ozzy Osbourne over here.
Dude.
So yes, pronounced I, but it
I.
looks like AI. And sometimes I'll call it AI. Sometimes I'll call it I. It's like Achan. Sometimes we say Achan, like Clay Aiken, but it's really pronounced like Achan. Okay. So
Now I'm picturing him.
There's
as
a
Clay
visual
Aiken.
for you.
He is played by playing this role. Clay
Big
Aiken.
Clay Aiken fan,
Back
Pastor?
of the throat.
So they win this battle, and they
Stop.
take off for this to fight the very next one against I, and they're like, this will be an easy one, so we don't need to send but like a couple thousand people, and they get their butts whooped, and people die.
And this was always the telltale story as an athlete, like, getting all like big and bad after your first victory and go into a smaller team, and they kick your butt. We kind of see that happen there. But the wake up call, and to me, this is another big moment where we see Joshua's leadership. I started calling him Josh again. I just know him as Josh. We're close.
You're in that VeggieTale life. I get it. I'm a little bit removed.
But we see him at like walk into this as a leader, like having to make like a really difficult decision. But again, being led by the Lord, with Achan and his family. Did I say that
job.
correct? Was that a good try?
You got to get the throat. It's real. It's phlegmy. It's throaty.
I did hawk that a while ago. Caroline got mad at me.
Achan.
I am mad at all of this.
Well, and I just imagine. I think of this moment. So they get their butts whooped, and people like the Israelites are now terrified. They're like, "What in the world?" Their hearts are beginning to melt in fear. And God's like, "Get up! There's somebody has taken what belongs to me, because everything, all the gold, the silver, all of the valuable, is supposed to go into the treasury." And so I just imagine Achan. The instructions are basically bring the tribes, and we're gonna before me. It's like, nope, not those guys. You guys are free to go. And I just imagine if I'm Achan, I'm like, uh-oh. You're hoping you could just kind of slip through undetected, and they go through the tribes, and they go down the families, and then they stop with him, and it's like, fess up.
Yeah.
And he does. And man, he gets smoked.
Well, and
Smoted.
can I geek out a little bit?
Smited.
Smot.
Like
Stoned.
I
But not recreationally.
I love the organizational thought here, because you see in Achan's Achan's sin in chapter 7, verse 16. Early the next morning, Joshua brought the tribes of Israel before the Lord, and the tribe of Judah was singled out. So we see the tribe, then the clans of Judah came forward, and the clan of Zerach was singled out. But then the families of Zerach came forward. And I love how their order is just down to the T.
I would be sweating it, like, as it narrows down, and I'm still in the running for the one that did it.
It's our tribe, but it won't be our clan. Oh, he just called our clan. Okay, they called our clan, but it's not our
Definitely
family.
not
It's not
us.
our family.
Yeah. Buried under your tent. I'll tell you, the real takeaway for me there, though, is, man, our sin has consequences. It does. And it affects our families. It affects those around us. It affects the 36 people that died at battle, because the hand of the Lord, the protection of the Lord wasn't with them. And, man, if you got anything buried in your life, it will have a negative effect. We will not. You can experience public success for a little bit with private sin going on, but it always will. It will develop. There is a harvest. Yeah. You do reap what you sow, and he had sown this under his tent. Yeah. And man, it came back to bite him, his family. The consequence was severe. Yeah.
Common rationalization is it's not a big deal. I'm not harming anybody else. It's just And here we see an example where it affects everyone around him.
Yeah, and he's basically like, I wanted it. I saw it, and I wanted it. Like, well,
we've all been there.
Yeah.
Well, and you see, it's just the imagery of sin as an infection.
Yeah,
and I love that. So they clear that up. Israelites go into I or AI. Again, this time it's a little different. And then we see them kind of start to build back. Morale's got to be higher at this point. And then they, and this is just me kind of thinking and talking out loud just from my standpoint. I see Joshua getting more confident in his leadership. He's had some pretty big moments now, like lots of highs, some difficulties. And now that we see what happens in chapter 9 with the Gibeonites, and they deceive them, they trick them.
Yeah, these guys, man, because they knew that they were going to get destroyed.
Oh, and I see this is like, and Pastor, you mentioned this earlier, that this was where we see Joshua's only kind of like,
yeah, so this is that one moment where it's like, at least that we know of, where his leadership, he could have done things differently. And so these surrounding nations, kings, they're like, it's just a matter of time till we're the next. So let's get a treaty with them is what they're doing. So they dress these guys up to look like a bunch of like, ragtag, bum, poor. They got this bread and it's like old and moldy. And so they come across and they're striking up this treaty. They're like, oh, we've been on a long journey and, make a treaty with us. It says in verse 12, this bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home the day we left, but now it's dry, it's moldy. These wineskins, they were new, but now look how cracked, and our clothes, our sandals are worn out from this very long journey. So they're making this case that like, oh, we're harmless people, make a treaty with us, because they know that otherwise they're going to get killed. And here's the one thing in verse 14, it says, the Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. That's the line that I would draw people's attention to. They did not inquire of the Lord. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. And so if you continue reading, you find out a little more about what happens. And so they got this oath, and you can't break an oath, even though it was made in deception. So they don't kill them, but they do make them servants. And anyway, they weren't supposed to do that. They were supposed to wipe out all of these surrounding nations. Why? Because they're supposed to be set apart. These other nations are very evil, very wicked, and God says, I don't want you to take on their behavior, into your people.
Right. I love that. They didn't inquire of the Lord, which is what we do all the time. We have a problem. We go to a friend for advice, and they're like, have you prayed about it? You're like, well, yeah, but I just wanted to know what you think, like that sort of thing.
Like, I'm not smarter than the Lord. Ask him. Like, I don't, yeah.
Okay, good answer. All right.
Yeah, you're right. We definitely do that all the time.
I didn't do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And chapter 10, I didn't take time for that one. That's a pretty wild story.
It's my favorite.
Can I say from a guy that loves action movies, this is my favorite chapter. This is my favorite chapter of the book of Joshua.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, you said it's your favorite. I'm going to just hand it over to you guys to unpack chapter 10.
Well, AJ, you can start out because I know, like, I've been hearing you for days say, "Sun, stand still." So I feel like that was like you secretly asking, "Hey, can I talk through this?"
Yeah, I mean, just epic moment, right? Like, Joshua steps out on the battlefield and basically commands God to do something. Like, haven't we established already that it's not like, God, get on my page, it's let me be on yours? And he walks out full confidence and was like, stop the sun so that we can continue to battle and win this. And the Lord does what he requests. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not a strategy that I would advise for people to take, but we see it work is just a really cool part in the story of Joshua. Yeah.
Which interesting about the sun standing still. I mean, isn't that technically impossible?
The last time I checked, it was
because the sun is
revolve around
and never really happened.
What do you have to say about that? Did the Bingies ask that question?
They did not.
Okay, got one on the Bingies. Score one for me.
And I'm really surprised because to me, they're just in some of the stuff that I've read in apologetics over the years. There are two stories in Joshua that really people use to discredit the Bible and use to say, I don't know that I can fully trust God or believe this. And those two stories, one we talked about with Achan and his family being all destroyed. People think that that's not what a merciful God would do, and we can talk about that later. But they also cite this miracle, like there's in other miracles, there's no explanation. A worldwide flood, okay, we can kind of get on page. That's just a lot of rain. Maybe that could happen. But this is one of the ones that from what I've read, there have been explanations for the sun standing still and the moon standing still, which by the way, one of the significant things, and Caroline, you brought this up when we were talking through the plagues, but the armies that they were fighting, their gods were the sun and the moon. And so Joshua was commanding our God to be defiant of their God.
Their God. Yeah.
Well, how much do you think they understood? I'm just kind of asking a question off the cuff here. How much do you think they understood about like the way the Earth orbits the sun? I mean, because if you didn't know better, you're like,
no, flat Earth.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's, because from your own perspective,
how much do we understand about it today? How about that question?
how so?
I digress. Anyways,
But if you're just like every day the sun it comes up over here, it goes down over there.
does.
So it's
It
certainly
moves through the sky for sure.
At what point did they understand? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't think they did at this point. Not how actually everything works.
Yeah.
So
But
because what's
again-
interesting to me about this story is it says that he asked in the presence. I'm pretty sure it says he asked in the presence of the people, because this is when you got like a bold request of God, you kind of like in your quiet time, like, Lord, if you could just make this sun stand still. But when you do it like with people, sun stand still. I just imagine somebody was like, well, technically God can't do that because the sun is standing still because either the earth's revolving around the sun. Maybe what you mean is earth stand still, but like,
Yeah. No, and he even told
thank
it
you,
where.
thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
This had not been revealed to them yet.
Well, and he even told him, he's like, let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of, I can't say that word. But he even said like where they needed to stay still. But a huge proclamation. And there have been a few people would say it was some kind of an eclipse. Some people have
Total
said it's
eclipse of the heart?
like a weird Yeah, exactly. And Joshua broke out his rock guitar at the
Waiting for
time.
you to do
Well,
it.
you know, you do have parts of the world, like Alaska, that has light for 24 hours. So it's kind of like, it may not be positionally exactly in the same place, but it never goes down. And so...
Yeah, so it's not stuff like that's not unprecedented on our planet. It was unprecedented and remains to be unprecedented in that part of the world.
Sure.
Now, there was an article that I read. It was written back in 2017. I think it was the Israel Times. I made a note of it. But the Israeli Times or whatever. But it was they had pinpointed the day that it would have happened, and it said it would have been the longest eclipse in history. And they say that it was like October 30th. It's by our calendar, October 30th, like 1207 BC or something like that. So kind of close to like the timeline that we've been studying from. They haven't been able to say much outside of that. It's just the fact that they've been able to calculate when it would have happened and that it would have been the longest eclipse ever. There's not a lot of technology that's been talked about since. I mean, it's relatively new, scientifically speaking. 2017
Well,
isn't that far
and
for that stuff to be really
Because
fully
I know
researched, but
publicly I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying there wasn't a question. There was a question, so
Okay.
don't
good.
at me,
Don't
Avengers. But
The question being,
is there any scientific record of this as this would cause tidal issues and could be traced to technology now?
so that's the only one that I've been able to see that was somewhat verifiable is in-depth
eclipse
scientific,
kind of thing, yeah.
using technology.
Well, and you got to, because I know there's a lot of things like, all right, so if the Earth stops orbiting around the sun, gravity's thrown off. Everything's going to get out of whack. But what we're doing is we're forgetting that with God, all things are possible. And I know that it means I got to sort of check maybe the scientific mind for just a moment. But I think to me, it's like, what a request. To be able to ask that of God. It makes me think of a quote from Mark Batterson, who's a pastor in D.C. He says, bold prayers honor God, and God honors bold prayers. God isn't offended by your biggest dreams or boldest prayers. He's offended by anything less. If your prayers aren't impossible to you, they are insulting to God. And I just think, if you really believe that with God all things are possible, then you begin to ask for the impossible. That was definitely impossible.
Yeah.
Yet God.
Yeah. Well, and we've established that the way these books were written and the historical accuracy, this wouldn't have been just a small story out of nothing. It wasn't a story written just to describe what we should do. It was an actual historical event according to the rest of the way the book was written.
All right, so moving on.
All right, so we just talked through like one of the coolest miracles in the book of Joshua, but the second half of chapter 10 is probably my favorite part. That was a super cool miracle. God did it, and I know
told us the last thing was your favorite.
Huh?
He said all of chapter 10 was his favorite. To be fair.
All of
He
chapter
didn't
10 is my
specify
favorite,
which
but the
half.
second part is
All of my kids are my favorite. But
You can say that because you only
Yeah,
have
you only
one.
have one
You
kid.
only have
It's easy for you to say.
As a fellow only child, we are often the favorite and least favorite.
of course.
But jumping into that, from verse 16, we see that they go into the battle where they kill 5 southern kings. And the reason I like this story so much is because it plays out like a super cool action movie. And one of the things that I've noticed with Joshua, Pastor, you talked about it. He was a warrior. He was a battler. He was a strategist. He was always like kind of in the thick of it. But you really see it here. In fact, in verse 20, it says, "So Joshua and the Israelite army continued the slaughter and completely crushed the enemy. They totally wiped out the 5 armies except for a tiny remnant that managed to reach their fortified towns. Then the Israelites returned to Joshua in the camp of Makkedah, and after that, no one dared to speak even a word against Israel." Just super brutal. But it gets better. It says, then Joshua...
But wait, there's more.
Joshua goes back, and this is where the kings have been hiding. He says, "Remove the rocks covering the opening of the cave, and bring the 5 kings to me." So they brought the 5 kings out of the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king Hebron, Jarmuth, I'm going to butcher these names.
Keep going, man. I'm proud of
Lashish,
you.
and Eglon.
Eglon.
When they brought them out, Joshua told the commanders of his army, "Come and put your feet on the king's necks." And they did as they were told. Joshua said, "Don't ever be afraid or discouraged. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord is going to do this to all of your enemies." Then Joshua killed each of the 5 kings and impaled them on 5 sharpened poles. So first of all, I just think of Vlad the Impaler right here, because when he's using poles and impaling them, they're leaving him there, and then he sends commands for them to go back later and bury them. So he's impaling these guys on poles and stacking them up
till evening. Till evening, yeah.
I mean, that's just that's
come one,
brutal.
come all.
Heat of
Take
the
a look.
day.
And I'm ready to go home and watch some action movies now. But I mean, it's just the cool story. But I love that Joshua puts them in the moment and says, "This is how God is going to wipe off your enemies. He's going to wipe them out."
Pretty cool that he's encouraging the men the same way that God encouraged him. So God told him, "Be strong and courageous," and then he goes and tells his men, "Be strong and courageous."
It's awesome.
Good leadership, yeah.
It is great leadership. But it's also just a fun part of the story. For me, anyway. I know.
We have different
not
definitions
everybody
of the word
enjoys
fun,
it.
I think, but yeah.
But I've just heard too many people say, "Well, the Bible is boring and all that, and blah blah
It's
blah."
not that.
Everything bleeds in to all of this. Yeah, like runs together.
So you can picture. So they cross the Jordan. They take Jericho. They go down south. They take the southern kings, and then chapter 11 they move up north and they defeat the northern kings.
Same thing, same way. Just boom.
They're on a roll.
In fact, if we go to 11 verse 12, Joshua slaughtered all the other kings and their people, completely destroying them, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded.
So there's always questions when we read this about like God commanding things like this. What's you guys' take on that?
It's completely moral.
Because
Sure.
Because God said it.
It is. I mean, because and it's just one of the it's one of those things where you're looking at the context, because I hear people say that this can't be the God of the New Testament because we don't see this kind of behavior in the New Testament. This is only in the Old Testament.
We do.
We do.
God kills someone in the New Testament, lying to the Holy Spirit.
But again, these in the New Testament, it wasn't us taking the land and basically God expunging the land of evil. In the New Testament, we see that they're in the land and they're waiting for Messiah and deliverer, but this time it's on a different scale. It's not in a physical way. It's in a way that they're not even aware of yet. But, I mean, a lot of people say, well, that's, this neither here nor there. It's kind of the same thing. But even here, you see that this is a way to really get the land prepared for what God's promised. But I even made a note of who are the people that actually we see reap this kind of judgment from the Lord through these books. And I mean, I could be wrong in some cases, but it seems like from a general standpoint, the people that see this kind of judgment are complete enemies of God, which is who these kings are, these kings and these nations, because they've had a chance. We see people like Rahab, and the Bible even mentions other foreigners that have been grafted into the Israelites. Yeah. But it's enemies of God and people who have committed but have disobeyed. And I see they both kind of reap the same kind of judgment ultimately. And so to me, it's just kind of a way to justify it. It also justifies I think back in Deuteronomy, maybe chapter 7, where God was telling Moses why he chose Israel. And it was because he loved him. And he is a God of love. But it's also he's going to protect his people, but he loves his people and he's just. And so he's not showing favoritism for his law. He's like, this is how you approach me. I see you shaking your head, Pastor.
No.
So yeah, we've worked through Leviticus, right? And in Leviticus, we were told the people that occupied the land of Canaan were morally corrupt. And then in Deuteronomy, it talks about they were sacrificing children. So these are not the best people. Yeah. And God chose to deal with them in the way he did. Really, the battle, it's kind of like Joshua and them were walking out the battle, but the battle was against the Lord, not against the Israelites. So
Exactly.
Well, and I don't know, scholarly answers and things like that, but I feel like
Don't sell yourself short.
I'm no scholar or a resident nerd, but I feel like, in today's age, like after Jesus has come as an atonement for our sin, I feel like, we have access to our personal relationship with the Holy Spirit. And so I feel like there is some level of, back then, being in the presence of the Lord was much more of a physical presence and being at a certain place with certain things and the Ark of the Covenant and all of these things. But we have an access to a relationship on a personal level that they didn't necessarily have access to. And so it feels like I don't know if that's why the Lord was like, take all these people out, because even though people, do horrible and horrific things even today, everyone has access to be forgiven because of that. So I don't know.
I think it's, we want to believe the best in people. And so it's difficult when we read these stories. You're like, well, but maybe they would change, maybe they should just be neighbors. And if the Israelites would be their neighbor, they would bring about a change. And the Lord has already said, no, these people, they're wicked, they're evil, they're against me. I want to separate you from them. And so for us, we have to picture somebody that is wicked, that is evil. I know, not to time stamp this particular podcast, but our whole world was just captured recently with this horrific shooting in Texas. And you think, how does that level of evil and wickedness exist? And let me just tell you, it's ridiculous to think somebody would walk into an elementary school and just start shooting the place up. That there's a level of evil and wickedness that we don't even like to think about. Yep. They would just kill children. Like culturally, they would sacrifice children to these pagan gods. That was commonplace. When I do want to believe that people deserve second chances and grace, and I'm all for that. But the Lord has kind of exacted vengeance on these people, and he's carrying it out through the Israelites. Yeah. So I think it's something that's hard for us to wrap our minds around, that people could be that wicked. And so this is kind of in my message. This is when I stomp the gas. This is when it's like we're entering into the second part of Joshua, and it gets a lot of, geographical locations and
also
people.
Feels like where we need to stomp the gas in this
Well,
podcast.
we will.
Speaking of stomping the gas.
We will, because eventually it turns into, you get this land and you get that land.
Yeah.
But I do want to say this before we leave chapter 11. We're told in verse 23, so Joshua took the entire land just as the Lord directed Moses. So he's finishing the task God gave to Moses. And then it says, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. So they have, they took Jericho, they took the southern kings, they've taken the northern kings, and now there is a little bit of peace and rest. And chapter 12 actually gives us a list of the defeated kings. If you want to roll through all of that, you can do so on your own time. But the book that I brought in here, Talk Through the Bible, says that there was 3 military campaigns involving more than 30 enemy armies.
Yeah.
These guys have been doing work.
Yeah.
Wow. And we were reminded in that chapter in Deuteronomy 7 that Israel was the smallest of the nations. And so they were the underdog, but then they really weren't the underdog because it wasn't the army of Israel, it was God's army.
Yeah.
Which you pointed out, AJ.
So I don't know if you guys do you want to talk through distribution of the land, or do we want to
As much as I would love to geek out and put our own map up and kind of plot it out, I'm good if we move forward.
What about a quick moment? So just a quick moment. I'll let Jason. I'll toss this your way. I'm gonna lob you this.
You want to move through it? Yes, let's move through it. Okay, well let's
just there's 2 things that I think I want.
No,
okay, let me
good.
nerd just for a moment. Yeah. So they come across the Jordan. They're to take this land, the land of Canaan, but there's some tribes that settle on the east side of the Jordan. You want to talk about?
Wasn't it 2.5 of them? 2.5 tribes?
Yep, the 2.5 tribes.
It was a Manasseh. and who else? Benjamin.
So the divisions of the land of the east is the half of Manasseh, Reubenites, the Gadites. They received inheritance that Moses had given them east of the Jordan. They requested it. They're like, we have large herds. This property is great for us. We'd like to stay here. And so it caused a pretty big rift for a little bit, because it was like, wait a second, we haven't taken the rest of the land. You can't settle in your land until we've all got our land. So they're like, send your fighting men. And so anyway,
it's going to come at a cost.
It does. It does, because what ends up happening to those guys? Anybody? Bueller? What happens to them?
I don't remember.
The moment we've all been waiting for.
They kind of drift off into oblivion. We don't know much. Like, eventually they don't become much.
So that even goes back to something I read, and I wasn't putting two and two together when I read it, but there are cities that are mentioned that are part of their land that there's no reference to or mention of anywhere else. So that just helped me kind of connect those dots. Wow. Thanks, Pastor.
There you go.
Good stuff.
Good thing we parked out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to stop quickly there, and I wanted to stop quickly in 14. Can I have permission, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
Permission granted.
Thank you.
It's your thing.
So this is great. Chapter 14. It talks about verse 6. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb. Remember Caleb? Okay, Caleb and Joshua were the only two from the first generation. They were the spies that said yes. The others said no. Caleb is still kicking. He says this. You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. I brought him back the report, goes on and on and on. And then he says this, verse 10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he's kept me alive for 45 years since that time. So 40 plus 45, he's 85.
Yep.
He says this, I am today 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle. And this dude is like, I still got some fight in me. I love this. Now give me the hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourselves heard then the Anakites were there, and their cities were large, and they're fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Get you a Caleb spirit. I love it. This guy's not wanting to put his feet up. He's like, I want to take some more land. I want what God has for me. I love it. Just think, as I look around
You're not retiring.
No, I look around Lifepoint Church, and I love the people around our church. I love the older generation that might say, the music's not necessarily my thing, and it doesn't look like maybe what I look like, but I realize God's got more territory for us to take. I want to be in the action. Yeah, I don't want to sit on the sidelines and, sip away the rest of my life. I want to be on the field. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play is what he's saying. And I just think that's kudos to those of you that I just want for maybe the older folks that feel like they don't look like the face of Lifepoint. I just, as your pastor, want to say thank you for being active in what God is doing in our faith community.
Yeah.
You're making a big impact, and you got a Caleb spirit is what I would say to a lot of those folks. I love it.
It's awesome.
Putting their preferences aside because they see the fruit of what the Lord's doing here.
Yeah, I'll take the presence of God over the preference of man. That's what I want.
It's good.
Well said. That's good.
It's good. So we're going to skip through the next 10 chapters.
Well, it
So
just keeps going through. You
essentially-
get this land, you get that land, allotment for these people.
This land is
allotment-
your land. This
land
land
is
is
my
my land.
Thank
we
you.
can acknowledge
that one.
it makes for less than stellar reading. However, this would have been, to the Hebrew people, one of the most important parts because this is the fulfillment of the promises of God. So,
And for those families and clans, their inheritances.
promises made to
a big
Abraham,
deal, yeah.
and then here we have the fulfillment.
Yeah.
So,
And even in chapter 20, you see them establishing the cities of refuge that we talked
Cities
about.
of
Yep,
refuge.
talked about it last week.
Yep. Those towns given to the
The
Levites.
Avenger of Blood.
Man.
I have not been able to get that out of my head.
Yeah, it's just the coolest.
Amazon, where are you? That should be a TV show.
Yeah.
And then moving in, they return home. But then, roughly, arguably one of the best parts of this book is chapter 23 and 24. And Pastor, you cover this in depth.
Hey, hey,
Come on, Caroline,
hey.
you know this one.
Goodbye. This
There
is
you
his
go.
farewell. He's like,
it's like the benediction.
yep.
Yep.
Yep. So good stuff.
And you can summarize it with be faithful to God. He's been faithful to us.
I just felt a little anticlimactic. That
Be faithful to God, for he has been faithful to us.
Don't worry, guys.
Better?
These last 2 chapters are the most important. But let's sum it up with these 7 words here. It's like, and move on. No.
Yay.
It is.
Go, Josh.
I love 23 when he says at the end of verse 14, he says, not one of the good promises the Lord, the God has given you has failed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Not one promise has failed. How awesome. I think about, I don't know, the worship song says, you've never failed me yet. Mm-hmm. He hasn't. He won't. He's trustworthy. He's good.
Well, and even when people failed or people stumbled along the way, I mean, God's promise never did. And I think that's a good reminder that no matter what you think that you can do to screw something up, like the Lord's plan is always going to prosper.
Yep. And then I'll wrap it up with this 24, maybe somewhere around your house, like on a cross stitch or a poster or a picture or something. It said, choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Where in the world did that come from? Chapter 24. Yeah. Chapter 24. This is the very end. He's like telling the people one last time. He re-ups the covenant. He's like, y'all got a choice to make.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I think it's interesting that we make it because some of the questions that always come in, because it has to do with God being a fair God and, getting people not getting what they deserve or people getting what they feel like they don't deserve. We see the nation of Israel go through some really hard times. And you can kind of trace a lot of that back to this point because he throws it down and he makes the challenge. He's like, but as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. And the people replied, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. And he gives them an out.
You don't mean that. You don't really mean that.
They gives them an out.
Stay tuned.
They re-up, they re-jump, they recommit, jumping into the commitment, the covenant. But we find out later that it's not necessarily this generation, but it is others that do end up following. But it's because of the commitment made by their family that they were involved in the covenant. And again, we see like the people who reap the judgment of God, enemies of God, and people who commit and disobey.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. Yep. And so at the very end, he dies.
He did.
Yep.
Now then.
Game over.
Yeah.
That's it. We just binged Joshua.
Yet another
yes.
book of the Bible.
We did it.
24 chapters down.
I feel like I have to open it now in case we have to answer something else.
You got to dramatically slam it again. Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is the best time probably to transition into our next segment called Inquiring Minds, because Inquiring Minds
want to know.
They ask lots of questions.
They are very inquisitive, inquiring minds, which, I appreciate sometimes.
I feel like they're just trying to stump us.
They're definitely.
I don't think that's hard to do.
That's true. That's true. It's not.
Okay. So a few of these actually we've already a little touched on a little bit. So maybe I'll read a few and we can kind of revisit them, but we don't have to park out too long on them if we've already talked about them. But one of them, was why was it necessary? This one I don't think we've gotten a chance to talk about yet. Why was it necessary that Joshua send spies ahead if the Lord was going with them? That was from Joshua 2.
Well, I don't know that we're given a particular reason, but I kind of look at it like this. I think there's this idea that if God's in it, it will just work. Just got to have faith. Anyone?
You gotta have faith.
Yes. So part of me feels like if God calls you to do something, if God calls you to do something, I think you should do it to the best of your ability. And if God calls a military leader like Joshua to go take this land, I think he's going to use the brain that God gave him, and a military leader is going to do a recon mission. He's going to go check it out. He's going to see, he wants to know what he's up against. And I don't think he's not going there to see if he can win. He's just scouting it out. So I would just say it's kind of, for instance, one of my verses, I use this all the time. Proverbs 21:31, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. Yeah. We love to be like, victory rests with the Lord, victory rests with the Lord. Yeah, but if you don't go get the horse ready, there's no victory. Yeah, so I think he was getting the horse ready. I think he was doing his part, knowing that if he does his part, God's got his part.
Yeah.
That's my answer.
That's good.
Thank you.
That's a good answer.
Next.
All right, next one. Why crushed it. Speaking of the spies, why did the two spies hide in the home of a prostitute? Wouldn't they, abiding by morality and those laws, have kept them away from her?
Yes, we talked about this a little earlier. I don't remember if we were being recorded or I don't know if it was in the actual podcast.
Yeah.
But the fact that
bonus
this
features.
is the bonus
Bonus features after dark.
triple
conversation.
features.
After dark.
Yeah. I
Is that
don't-
another segment?
Yeah,
I
it
haven't.
sounds shady.
Too much.
I haven't tuned
Speaking
into that.
of
Speaking of after
shady.
dark and shady.
So speaking of shady, this
Shady
would have
lady.
been a better description of Rahab. We don't know that she was a prostitute by trade. It was more of a prostitute by reputation. But it kind of speaks to that the fact that where she was more like almost like an inn, like where you would go to stay or kind of to hide out, or probably a lot of men in Jericho may have gone there to meet mistresses or to have mistresses. And so it was more like that. So it wasn't like she was a straight up just prostitute. What she did, she ran a shady inn, and this is where they went to hide.
yeah.
She's called a harlot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Repeatedly.
Innkeeper.
Well.
Just saying.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find something from a previous message that I did where it took the word that's used for harlot and speaks to that just a moment. And if I can find it, I'll share that with you.
So
real
I
quick.
think it's a little bit interesting that Rahab, as we talked about a little bit earlier, is referred to as, someone who was righteous in the sight of the Lord. Yet she told a lie, bold-faced lie, in the presence of the Lord, and is commended after the fact.
She did say that she had seen them, but they weren't there. And technically, they weren't there. They were on the roof. Is that not a justified?
I mean,
I like this because this raises a lot of like good ethical questions, even for a lot of what believers that I know wrestle with, or even how we can stay morally intact in our military tactics and overseas and stuff like that. So a lot of this stuff is still relevant today. Is like, just like with the Holocaust, was it okay for those guys to lie when they were hiding Jews like in their basement or somewhere else? Like,
Yeah.
So here's
Can I lie to my employer if it serves the Lord?
he's sitting across the table from you, so I'm going to go with no.
yeah, you should never lie to your employer.
Probably not.
Yeah. So, I think about. So obviously, Rahab has this moment where she lies. I'm trying to think through. There's another instance where, because I think of Pastor Greg Surratt. This is a lie is an abomination in the sight of God, but an ever-present help in our time of need. and I feel like it's like morally, which would have been the greater grievance, the greater sin, to turn over God's people as they're about to enter the land, or to tell a lie and protect them. And she was protecting life. So here's what I was going to say just about Rahab real quick. I found this. This goes back to the Make Ready. This was part 4, where I was talking about Rahab, and some scholars make a case that maybe she wasn't a prostitute, but instead she was an innkeeper. You made mention to this. However, the language of the New Testament would debunk this myth. The word porne is where we get pornography or immorality. And apparently that is what is used, the root of that is what is used when it describes her. So
it's worse than you thought.
So anyway, well, there is a lot of speculation. It was not uncommon for people like this. They would have lived along the wall. That was kind of the lesser of the population. And so, we know her house was on the wall because that's where they let the scarlet cord down. And so, yeah, I don't know exactly, but
It's a good stab.
oh, and I don't think this question wasn't in there, but
I'm sure I talk more about that in the message, but it was many years ago.
Yeah.
And the brain can only,
Yeah.
retain so much stuff.
Yeah.
But speaking of, I don't think this was in these questions, but it was asked. Somebody asked me about this earlier. How was her and her family safe in the wall when the walls collapsed?
Mm-hmm.
Like whenever Joshua and Israelite army went in.
They fell from the inside out.
Well, so I found I dug for that intentionally, just because that question was asked specifically. And the notes that I found were pretty cool because they actually did find like the ruins of Jericho, or what they believed to be the ruins of Jericho. But there was evidence for Rahab's story. In 1907 and 1909, there was a German excavation, and they found layers of the wall, and all the wall had basically sat down on themselves, just like it said in the Bible. But there was a section of the north part of the wall that was still standing. And there was a house connected to where it would have been. And so we don't know that it was Rahab's, but if we're going by the biblical account, it was probably Rahab's.
It would make sense. And then they talk about how a lot of the ruins were burned. Well, what did they do when they went in and took the city?
Yep.
They torched the place. And so, some people have tried to make a case. Maybe there was a great earthquake that could have caused that. How do we know it was God? I'm like, well, listen, if there was an earthquake at the exact moment they finished walking 7 times, shouted out loud, I'm just going to say God knocked it down with an earthquake.
Still a miracle.
So
one of those points, it's like it's easier to believe what the Bible says than to believe in all the coincidences of everything else. All right, so from Joshua 6, and we did talk about this, but I just wanted to bring it back up because Pastor Jason, you had some notes on here that I think that would be a cool finish answer to this question. Why did Joshua curse the next person to build Jericho? You wrote on here a reference to 1 Kings.
Yeah, so that would have been, so in 1 Kings 16:34, we see this is where Israel is kind of falling into the state of just like apostasy, just like falling away from the Lord. You see this is where, is it Ahab marries Jezebel, and he is completely leading, anything he can do away from God, he does. And in fact, in his charge, a guy named Hiel or something like that.
just say it with confidence.
Hiel.
There you go.
Sounds kind of like a
Oh,
Superman name,
Hiel.
like
hell.
playing a kryptonite. But anyway, under Ahab's watch, he starts to rebuild Jericho, and his firstborn dies as he's resurrecting the walls or rebuilding the walls. And when he is putting up the gates, his youngest son dies. And so it's a fulfillment of the curse. Now, there is some debate on whether those sons died from natural causes or if they actually were sacrificed so that he could rebuild the city. That's a speculation. Either way, this little curse that Joshua says comes to pass. And the reason he did that was because to remind everybody through the ages that, again, Pastor, like you said, this was God's city. It was wholly devoted back to him. It was his victory, and it was like their first fruits of their spoils in the promised land.
Yeah. Again, I go back to, it belongs to God. He said it is mine.
Yep.
And when you take what belongs to him, it doesn't end well.
Yeah, that's true. All right, from Joshua 22, why was it assumed that the altar built by the people of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh was an altar to a pagan god? And if that was the assumption, why were the priests so easily convinced it was not? I didn't prepare y'all for this question.
That's a good one. Pastor Jason? I'm a little concerned. I'm looking at both of your Bibles, and it doesn't look like anything.
At least we have a Bible.
Yeah. Is it written on your bubbly can? Because, come on, man.
The word of the Lord goes forth in many, many different mediums these days.
Well, I like to carry a paper one like Jesus carried. Oh, wait.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Oh, wait.
We'll get to that one in Inquiring Minds in the New Testament.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Why was it assumed that the altar built by the people of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh was an altar to a pagan god? That was from Joshua 22.
Okay.
Pastor, did you want that? Or?
So Reuben, Gad, Manasseh were the 2.5 tribes on the east side, right?
Yep.
Little east side, west side conflict. And so, remember, they made a
OG
request.
It's a recurring
They
theme.
made a request to have that land because it's perfect for large herds. We have large herds. So they're setting up this altar. In their mind, they're afraid that the west side is not going to claim the east side. And they're going to be like, what? We don't have any connection. So they're like, let's build a replica altar similar to your altar. We don't really want to offer, we're not going to offer burnt offerings there. We just want it to let you guys know that we're like you guys. We're with you. Because it says in verse 24, they're like, no, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you, which I want to be like, no, he didn't make a boundary. You guys chose the wrong side of the river. And he just kind of was like, okay, sure, you can have that. So they did it to try to keep a connection, but there was a concern that if they use that and they begin to make sacrifices on that altar, that's like we don't do that because that's not the place that was prescribed for them.
Yeah. That's good.
Is that right?
That's good. Yep.
Do you concur?
Oh, yeah, completely. I mean, I feel like it's pretty much right there. I mean,
Liked
it's a pretty,
everything I heard.
pretty drawn out saga, but
Yeah, because they're like, we didn't want to rebel against
Yeah.
the Lord. Verse 29, it says this.
it was never the intent. But then we find at the end of the chapter, like Phinehas, son of Eleazar, he was the priest. Everybody was happy. No more of war was spoke again. So I mean, it looks good. Pretty cut and dry, I think.
All right. Well, this is our last Inquiring Minds question, and it is also going to serve as a segue into our last segment, Cringe the Bible, because, we got some answers that are going
About to get cringy.
Yeah.
The cringies.
So why did the Israelites not continue to circumcise their children after leaving Egypt?
Great question.
That's a really good question.
So the population, people they're traveling. We lost 1.2 million people. Give
we
or
say
take.
that it was like 600 and some thousand people.
Men. Yeah, fighting men. And so over this period of 40 years, obviously people have been born in the wilderness, and life is still happening. They're still, multiplying. And I'm guessing
Being fruitful.
and multiplying. That was a command. And so I guess while they were traveling, this wasn't, I don't know if it just wasn't a priority, or I don't know, that they obviously didn't practice this.
Well, maybe they didn't have the proper sanitation stations out in the wilderness
Possibility.
that they were
Well-
used to.
well, And one of the things I thought about too
Egypt?
is like a lot of the stuff that was being written and given to Moses, like it happened in pretty straightforward times, but they were still like thinking through all of those people traveling all together, divvying out, the priest and all the people that would observe and enforce these things. Like, was it super available, the information? How quickly did they have to jump into that? Especially while they were still in transit. That's
like the information about we should do
like
this.
everything we have to do. Like, where were they? And, was that just one of the ones that they, as a nation, we just missed this one. Sorry, before we go in to the promised land, we got to do this now.
And do you think they might be reminded every time they bathe? Like, hey, what do you got going on there?
Wow.
They bathe together.
No? Where do you think they were bathing? Down by the river, of course.
Tell us your theories, AJ. Well,
Yeah.
You can answer the question. You got this one.
You don't think a non-circumcised would look at the circumcised and be like, what's going on?
Where do you think they were living? What
I
colony?
hate it here.
No?
AJ, what's
Am I
that?
the only one?
I don't even remember the question now.
It was, why did they stop circumcising?
Why did they stop?
Oh, yeah. Why did they?
But you said perhaps, I don't think they forgot because they would be reminded. It's not like.
Yeah. And I haven't read of any reason they would have. I did a quick little search, while we were sitting here, but I couldn't find anything that really pointed to the fact.
The Lord did command them to get back to the practice.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting, so when you read it, chapter 5, verse 2, at that time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites. Like, it's like, okay.
Let's go.
You just sharpening that blade.
Hence why this is part of Cringe the Bible.
Yeah,
Correct,
well, there's
Caroline?
another reason that it's part of Cringe the Bible, and that, AJ, you said you had researched some things that...
Well, so, yeah, in this instance, it talks about flint knives, which were probably more like, it's probably a sharp stone.
Yeah, how sharp can you get
Like
a
Flintstones?
I wouldn't imagine.
little Flintstone? I used to take those vitamins when I was a kid. Little
Eat the
I don't want these
We are
vitamins.
Flintstone kids
10 million strong and growing.
and growing. Yeah, it applies. And
But they weren't Flintstone kids, which is now they're Flintstone adults, which is way worse.
Would you
Right,
rather be a
so-
Flintstone kid? Take your vitamins, everyone.
anyways, my point in bringing that up, how sharp can you make a rock? You think, it probably didn't cut the way that we're accustomed to.
The cringe just went to another level.
That's cringy.
You might even have some
No. Don't
We get it. We get it.
hand motions. Do not do hand motions. Well, you said that you read
But
somewhere
imagine.
that,
I'd rather not.
So I did hear, on the internet, which makes it 100% true,
as Abraham Lincoln has said, everything on the internet you read is true.
that early Bible, they might have even used a sharp, clean fingernail.
Like attached fingernail, or like let me clip my fingernail off and.
What do you think they have acrylics just chilling on the blanket?
I'm just saying, like that seems awkward to use your finger. Like I could see it.
It's awkward.
If it's like,
You want to know what else is awkward? Talking about this for some reason. I don't know
But
why.
I was just thinking, clip it off. You could use it way more like a knife.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway.
It's been a fun run, guys. This has been the podcast has been fun, but we may have just had to change our rating.
This is where it ends.
Got ourselves canceled, I'm pretty sure. I think there was another cringe moment. I don't know that it could even come close to that, but I think we do have one more that Pastor Jason, you had found and what you've written in notes as Josh 1020.
That was just it's cringy because of how violent it just goes back to chapter 10 when Joshua they're slaughtering all the kings.
And look at you say the word slaughter like you're just dragging that out. You doing okay, man? Are you good?
But when I say that, like I say it like that,
part
to
is
me
the
that
slaughter.
it enhances what was happening. The fact, with him taking the poles in and getting these bodies up on the poles and having his leaders put their feet on their necks and him going by and killing the kings. It as cool as it is action wise in the story, like it can be a pretty cringy moment for somebody just reading, especially when you're reading about like the shepherd in the pasture and getting to kind of like the peaceful encouragements of Psalms, but then you flip back to Josh and you're like, whoa, this is pretty bloody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say this one really, and the next Judges got some interesting stuff next week. Will be a blast. But the Bible it leaves the PG-13 rating and it gets a little R. I'm just a warning.
It's real
for the listeners out there.
Real talk.
It's true. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up
That
for
is a
us
wrap.
for Joshua. Thank you guys for joining us. Don't forget, if you have liked maybe not all, but some of what you've heard, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review, tell your friends, tell your neighbors.
I just want to thank you guys for this opportunity.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for the next time I get invited to be on
Hold your breath.
bonus features.
Don't call us. We'll call you.
You and your fingernail can just wait for our phone call. All right, guys. Well, that's a wrap. We will see you on Sunday for Judges.